Welcome to But Are There Dragons, a podcast where two friends pick a book at least one of them has not read and work their way through it a few chapters at a time.
I'm your host, Kritter.
And I'm your host, Jess.
And we're continuing this adventure with The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien, with me as the resident Lord of the Rings veteran.
And me as the Tolkien first-timer.
In this, our second episode of Season 3, we're going to discuss Book 3, Chapters 4 and 5. Before we dive in, Jessica, what's new with you? How are you feeling?
I am feeling good. It's really good to be back in Hobbit land. In Tolkien land.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I misspoke. But we do spend some time with the hobbits, and that's why they were the uppermost on my mind. On a personal note, got some really good news today. Closed on a brand new house. So, all
Woo!
the things. Super, super excited.
Really good day. Overall, excellent day.
Yeah.
Lots of reading.
Lots of reading.
For the episode, and then, closing on a house casually. Super casually.
No big.
Yeah, nothing big. Yeah, nothing big over here, really. I think it's storming or about to, so we'll see what happens with this recording, but it'll be fine. It's gonna be fine.
Yes.
I'm not worried about it at all. I think it's gonna be great. And
awesome.
This weekend, just a fun little thing about me is my dad got my mom a massage for Christmas, and she was gonna come up to my area to go to the spa, and I was going to just fall on the sword and join her, I guess. And so that's this weekend, so I'm gonna have a spa day on Saturday.
Such a good daughter.
Great. I know. I don't know what they would do without me. I sacrifice so much for them. But anyways, looking forward to that. But
nice.
Yeah. Okay, so shall we get started on the actual book, the reason we're here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that thing? Yeah.
Yeah, that old thing? All right,
yeah.
So Book 3, Chapter 4, Treebeard.
Mm-hmm.
So in this chapter, Merry and Pippin stumble upon Treebeard, a.k.a. Fangorn, the eldest of the Ents, the shepherds of the trees. The Ents have been around for a very, very long time and had never heard of hobbits. In fact, hobbits didn't have a place on their very long, established list of living creatures. Did you find this interesting or surprising?
I did. I love the fact that they, in order to try and keep straight how many creatures they are, they decided to write a song about it. I thought that was precious.
Uh-huh.
There's so much to love about Treebeard. His vibe from the very beginning is, I am prepared to dislike you, but I'll try not to be hasty, which puts me in mind of a certain other creature. So,
Yeah.
I loved everything about Treebeard, and everything we learned about Ents here absolutely surpassed what I got from the movies, which was fantastic. And it was just very cool and very endearing.
Yeah. I really liked, well, first of all, the list really reminded me of did you have growing up, maybe a children's book or flashcards that are A is for antelope, B is for buffalo, C is for cheetah. Did you have that, where it's animals and letters? That's kind of, I don't know why, but whenever he was doing the little rhyme about all the creatures, it just reminded me of that. It was there's no H's for hobbit. That's so sad. But then they ultimately decided to add the hobbits, which I think was great.
Yes.
So that's good. Okay, so in hearing about the lands on and in which the hobbits lived, Treebeard inquired about whether the hobbits had seen or heard of the Entwives, who had been lost long ago. Did any part of this story, because it was pretty long, pique your interest?
Absolutely. So I think that my big takeaway is that the story about the Entwives is pretty sad. I thought it was a really kind of a sad story. And then that the Entwives had different tastes and that they liked certain things, and that it was ultimately a compliment to the Shire that he thought that the Entwives would enjoy it there. But there was a highlight that I made there where he said, a little literary umami, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Our hearts did not go on growing in the same way, when he talks about the separation of the Ents and the Entwives. And I just thought that it was really sad.
Wow.
And he later in the chapter talks about how he wishes to actually see his beloved one more time. I'm not going to try to pronounce her name. It was terrible.
Uh-huh. It was sad. It
It
was
was
really
really
sad.
sad.
And I gather that the Entwives basically invented agriculture. Is that what it
That's what
sounded
I
like?
got from
Okay,
it.
that's what it sounded like to
Yeah.
me, that was kind of cool.
I feel like the Entwives probably fostered the Shire, so
Yeah.
after he explains why he thought they might like the place, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, Hobbit cozy is totally their vibe. Are we sure there wasn't a founding Entwife?
Yeah. Did they like invent it or something? Maybe.
Maybe.
So speaking of, maybe they invented the Shire, what do you think? Do you have any personal head canons about what happened to the Entwives? Because it's such a mystery at this point.
So I think kind of like how Treebeard was implying that some Ents became more tree-like and essentially reverted to being essentially regular trees, that
Yeah.
maybe some kind of entropy took over for the Entwives, and maybe they became little apple orchards
Aw.
or cornfields or wild grain, or like maybe
Yeah.
they got so connected to a place that they also kind of stopped venturing out.
Wow. Okay. So
Which to me is just headcanon for I don't want to think about anybody doing anything bad to Entwives.
mhm.
So I like my story better.
Right, because in the book itself they were like, so this terrible thing happened. I can't remember if they had a name for it, but it was just like the reckoning, this devastating thing that happened to the
Mm-hmm.
land that the Entwives lived in, their
The
beloved
Brown Lands.
the Brown Lands. And during the war against Sauron, he just obliterated it.
Yeah.
And the question was that their end, or did they move on, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
Treebeard had heard tales that maybe they headed one way or the other way or the other way, and no one had known, and they had searched and searched and not found them. What?
What
What?
what if Goldberry was an Entwife?
What if?
She was very connected to the land that
It's
they were
true.
in. Sorry.
No, Goldberry is like, we always circle back to her, like, ooh, what
Mm-hmm.
if this was her? Her and Tom,
I mean,
they're anomalies.
I really like the river sprite or river goddess because it really seems to fit her narrative to a T.
Mm-hmm.
But she's just so connected to the land that I was like, maybe, we don't know.
Maybe. I know one theory is that they, like how Sam mentioned in, I think, chapter 1 or one of the first chapters, that his cousin or something had seen trees walking. Remember?
Yes.
So that's what I am latching onto as that's where they are. Like, I want them to be near
Ooh.
the Shire.
I mean, I do too.
That's like the only evidence I have to, like, in support of it, other than the fact that the Ents think that they would like the Shire also. But I would rather that than the sad ending. But I also saw, when I was Googling around, somebody had the theory, and I don't subscribe to this theory, but I think it's fun, that the Entwives evolved or devolved, whatever you want to, probably evolved into hobbits. How do you feel about that theory?
I think that's too small for them, honestly. I think that they're like abstract beings of power. I look at Treebeard and I think of a peer to Treebeard, and I'm like, not to belittle my halfling friends because we know I love them.
Mm-hmm.
But they are beings with a capital B.
Yeah. And the hobbits are, I want to say it's pretty well established that the hobbits are like humanesque, right? And that's not what the vibe that I get from the Ents, right? They're
not at all.
They're like pre-troll, like beings of the earth, basically. So I don't subscribe to that. It is a fun one though. It's a fun little theory that I wouldn't have thought of myself for sure. Although them cultivating the Shire, that is something I like. Which kind of goes along with the thing that I like, which is that's where they live now, or somewhere near there at least. Because I don't want them to die. I want a happy ending with that.
Well, and the Shire, generally speaking, is just a safer place to be, right? Like, it's relatively untouched and pristine still, so it seems as safe a place as any.
Agreed. Okay, so we meet Treebeard. We talk about the hobbits. We talk about the Entwives. It's a long chapter, but
Mm-hmm.
eventually Treebeard called an
Mm-hmm.
Entmoot, having noticed that Saruman was becoming a real problem. While it was ongoing, Merry and Pippin spent some time with another Ent, Bregalad, who explained to them that the orcs had been cutting trees down for no reason. The Entmoot concluded with the Ents deciding to march against Saruman to war. Now, this went down very differently in the movies. If you remember, you might not. Did you enjoy how it played out in the book?
I did. I thought that it was much more context. So, first off, that they met a different Ent in
Yeah.
person and got a name.
Mm-hmm.
And that Ent had, his homeland had been ravaged by the orcs, and the progression of the Entmoot. Also, I don't know that the movie necessarily had time for it, so it's really not shade against how Peter Jackson chose to do it. But there was a real progression because, as you mentioned, it was kind of a longer chapter. There was a real progression from when we first encountered Treebeard to his call to arms
Yeah.
and talking about the treachery of a neighbor in regards to Saruman and how he used to come to the forest, but not anymore. And, there was a real progression through the course of the chapter, which was actually kind of well woven through. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
overly in your face. So I thought that it kind of just flowed subtly in the background, kind of like Ent speak. So
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of neat because, when he first met them, he was just saying that there's something amiss. And then he is essentially fomenting rebellion and calling his peers to arms to hold Saruman accountable for the actions of himself and his orcs.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah, I
pretty,
was
it's a
wondering.
pretty big transition.
It was, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna be completely transparent. And I want to say I admitted this like the first time I read the books, I remember thinking the Tom Bombadil chapters were like dumb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this time around, I did not feel that way at all. I was like fascinated by all of it. So this time around, I can't remember how I felt the first time whenever I read this, but I did find myself kind of like looking at how much time was left in the chapter. And I feel so bad about that. But like it did feel very long to me. And part of me wonders if it's one because of Andy Serkis's performance, because he did the Ent thing, which is
Yep.
and then right. And I had it sped up I always have it sped up to 1.3 because I can't handle normal narrator speed. It's just too slow for me. Even at 1.3, it was like really slow. So I wonder if that had something to do with it. I didn't speed it up any further than 1.3. And I also wonder if that was a deliberate move on Tolkien's part to kind of put us in the Ent mindset, right? We're
Yeah.
not going to rush through this chapter. We're
Mm-mm.
not going to be hasty. I'm going to take you on the journey that Treebeard went on to go from there's something a little off to we're declaring open war as the first
Mm-hmm.
group of people to declare open war so far in this
Yeah.
series, right? Like
Yeah.
it's
And
it's a
that's definitely significant.
it is. Yeah, it's really so
Nature itself is declaring war on
yeah.
Saruman.
Yes, because of his cruelty, because like what he's doing is a direct attack on life and the
Mm-hmm.
Earth or the Middle Earth, and so even though I did feel like it was long in the moment, the chapter after the chapter, I was like, dang, like that was really good. Like you got a
Yeah.
lot out of that one, and
So I will say, I also was like, dang, how much longer is this chapter? So
yeah,
as we make our outline and I'm like, oh, cool. It's a breezy 2 chapters. No problem. I'll get through it. And by the time we're getting introduced to the second and quick beam, I'm like,
mm-hmm.
oh, we're still going. Oh,
The answer still
okay.
the chapter
Okay.
continues. I know.
So I wasn't necessarily anxious for it to get over, but it was a thick chapter compared to what I was expecting because I was like, oh, we meet Treebeard.
Yeah.
And I think I was just kind of a little dismissive of that. And
Yeah.
I feel like the chapter showed me otherwise.
I do feel like the writing, since the parties have broken up and we still haven't met Frodo and Sam yet, this book or whatever, um, it's interesting how we kind of leap ahead in like pretty big strides, right? It's like, okay, we're starting with meeting Treebeard at the beginning of this chapter, and by the end of the chapter, they're at the steps of Isengard. Like, like that's a big like change. We're not messing around. Whenever we get to a Merry and Pippin POV, by golly, we're gonna make some strides. Is what he's doing. So it's been interesting for sure. The pacing and everything having to follow multiple POVs finally, because like in the Hobbit, that was never the case.
That was one of the things that jumped out to me when we switched gears to chapter 5 was, so they're still 2 full days behind them. So to your point, the kind of the leapfrogging of the timeline, seeing where we're at with the separate parties is very interesting.
Yeah, because in some books, like I want to like the Wheel of Time, for example, no spoilers at all, but it's like if there's something happening, you will get like, one character that's experiencing it, and then like immediately following that will be the next character who's like picking up right where that left off in time. Essentially, that happens a lot, and so it's just like you're literally like, everything is happening in rapid succession within the confines of a chapter too. Like you switch POVs mid chapter. This is very much like block. This is Merry and Pippin's time. We're gonna make progress.
And I do feel like they're bigger blocks so far.
Yeah, big chunks. Like when I was looking at the chapter titles when we were working on like our overall what we're going to read outline, I was just like, oh my gosh, like some of these chapters are like, that's just a chapter, like that one thing. Like I would think that title would be multiple chapters, but no, it's just one. So yeah, I like
that's the fun part, folks, of letting the first time reader set a preliminary outline and then the vet will review it and go, hey, wait a minute. Based on some things I'm not going to clarify for you, I would like to revise that outline.
Yeah. I think today in a DM, I was like, this is a big boy read. So we shortened it. So anyways, that's we're getting a little far afield. But you did mention that like the like nature itself is rising up against Saruman, which I think I also clocked like the symbolism of it all. And I remember in The Hobbit and maybe even in the Fellowship of the Ring, we noted that Tolkien has, I know he doesn't like allegory, but he's got a clear like environmentalist tilt to slant. Yeah. Okay. So it's not just, I know it's not just me because we talked about it before. I think it reared its head again here. Yeah.
So there were a couple. I have the receipts. Would you like to hear them?
I would love the receipts.
Okay. So first off is, when Treebeard and Merry and Pippin are talking before they even get to Treebeard's house, which, by the way, Treebeard's house is a thing I would have liked to have seen. Somebody please create a Treebeard's house for me. Please and thank you. But anyways, they were chatting and Treebeard gets asked if he knows of Gandalf, and he said yes. He's the only wizard that really cares about trees, and I thought that was again precious. And then he was talking about the treachery of the neighbor. He was talking about the orcs that Saruman had created and how he felt that they were tainted. I can't use tainted in this context. They were, an evil blend potentially of men and orc because they were able to withstand the sunlight. And so it is a mark of evil things that they cannot abide the sun, but Saruman's orcs can. And so he hypothesizes that perhaps there's the blood of men in them. And he just talks over and over about that. And again, the treachery of a neighbor. So it's not literary umami, right? But it's just a simplistic way to succinctly put it. And I thought that it was brilliant. And then the other thing is talking about trolls being a mockery of Ents. So those were all kind of nature-based themes that were mentioned in here that all, for me, were just clear indicators pointing at Fangorn / Treebeard as a representative of nature saying, this cannot stand and we must fight.
This is unnatural and
Mm-hmm.
evil, and therefore we have to rise against.
Mm-hmm.
I love whenever Tolkien's like attitudes obviously align with mine. Who doesn't love that? But also that, like, even though he didn't like allegory or whatever, it still comes through sometimes. Yeah. I'm like, yes, I love this about this. This is great. Also, so there was something, the difference in this from the movie that I really, really liked was the Ents came to their own conclusion that they were going to go to war against Saruman after the at the Entmoot, because in the movie, if you'll recall, the hobbits like tricked them into going close enough to Isengard so that they would see the destruction. And Ents are incredibly old, presumably wise beings. Like, you don't need little hobbits to show you the way, right? And you've been living in this forest, so it makes sense that you would know what's happening with it. So I think, when it comes to like which one do I like better, this one, I think it makes more sense. And it was a fun thing in the movie where it's like, oh, the closer you are to danger, the farther you are from harm. Of course, I like the hobbits being like hobbity, but at the same time, it didn't make as much sense as the Ents coming to their own conclusion, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I definitely like the autonomy play of them, having the wherewithal to say, this is not right and we must put an end to it. I also believe that. I did like that. I did find what I believe is a movie quote in there that says, we do not say anything in it unless it is worth taking a long time to say. And I highlighted it because I was like, I am pretty sure this made it in there somewhere.
It did, except for it sounded more like a long time to say.
I cannot talk on 0.65. So
yeah, it's tough, but that's I loved. Yeah. I really like the Ent parts in the movie because it's just like really, well, to use your word, precious, right? Because he's just so lovable, even though the hobbits are like, oh my gosh, let's go, let's move on, let's pick up the pace a little bit. But he just doesn't pick up the pace until the time comes, and then they're gonna take on Saruman and everything heated. Until he gets heated.
Once he's heated, there ain't no going back.
Yeah. So the Ents are on the march, right? They go to war, singing songs, etc. But then eventually, as their pace continues, Treebeard acknowledges that with Saruman as an opponent, the Ents may very well be marching to their death. But he resolves to march on anyway, noting that doing so may help the other creatures in Middle-earth, and acknowledging that doom would find them anyway if they chose to stay home. Would you call this bleak or realistic?
I'm going to go with the pragmatic play, which I actually love to see from a set of characters in a story that could be quite removed and have quite kind of a skewed perspective.
Yeah.
So I thought that was relatively insightful. So that didn't bother me at all. I was like, okay, so he is with it enough. I feel like I'm questioning the sanity of an entity, and that's not what I'm trying to say, but like, he's pretty dang old. Been around a really long time, but he is, put all of the context clues together and has a really good sense of what's really going down.
Yeah. I feel like it's relatable, right? Because, in real life, sometimes if I'm angry or whatever, I'll get so worked up about something and like put a plan into action. Maybe I send an email or like, do something out of anger, say something, send a text message, whatever, out of anger. And then once that happens, you like take a breath and you're just like, this may not turn out the way that I wanted it to, and it's just interesting how obviously his thing was on a much larger scale than something like that, but it's just completely relatable in my opinion. You can't just ride the heat and the intensity and the excitement and the adrenaline all through something almost without fail. You're going to stop and pause and be like, oh God, okay, I guess we're doing this, So yeah. I liked that about it.
Right.
Okay, so as I said, it's a long chapter. I tried to pull the highlights out. Was there anything else for this chapter before we move on? Did you like the chapter? I think we kind of talked about that.
Yes, I did like the chapter. So I think that this is fun for me when I find little nuggets. They don't change the meter. You know what I mean? They don't change which way the ship is heading in any way whatsoever. I clearly already like the story, but these are little treasure troves of information that I had no way of knowing. And again, they don't change the bulk and breadth of the story, which is why adaptation probably chose to leave it behind, but it's extra context that to me makes the fabric of these stories richer and makes me excited to go back and rewatch and with, just this little bit more oomph.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It'll be fun going back and watching again.
I did have one other thing from this chapter. While Treebeard was talking about Saruman, he did say he is plotting to become a power, capitalized. So I just thought that, again, that just stood out to me that even somebody from afar who's not having direct interactions with him can see what he is up to and where he's trying to go. And it seemed very significant to me that it was capitalized.
A power. Yeah, it would make you wonder what all in Middle-earth would be classified as a power with a capital P, Yeah. Because if Saruman wasn't yet as the head of the White Council, what does Sauron presumably?
He's still trying to elevate from there, and dear God, what does that mean?
What does that mean? Exactly. That's a good point. Okay, so there being no further business about Chapter 4, let's move to Book 3, Chapter 5, The White Rider. So we're back with Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. They examine the scene from the battle between the orcs and the riders of Rohan and are encouraged to find some tracks and the leftovers from the Hobbit's lembas snack. So I loved how both Legolas and Aragorn agreed that the fact that they ate first thing before even fleeing to safety was pretty clear proof that these were hobbits they were dealing with. Anything stand out to you from the sequence?
Just that I love them, and they were looking for footprints from the mystery man that they spotted the night before, and I was like, and this is why these guys are the hunters, trackers, and professionals, because it wouldn't even occur to me to be looking for footprints for the suspicious man. So I did love that they were looking for it. I did love the little kind of throwaway comment about the lembas bread. And then there was a little bit of a quip in there about trying hard to find them, because this is the part where it says, they found markings, but it's still 2 days old. And I think Gimli is grousing, and so they're talking about supplies running low, and we can show our friendship by starving together. So I was like, okay, things are getting a little tense.
A little. It kind of reminds you of the hobbits in Mirkwood. A little bit, right? Because they're all just they get so grumbly and annoyed with each other. Okay, so I'm not gonna lie. Whenever I was reading the sequence, they're inspecting the battle scene, all that stuff. Usually when I'm watching the movies, I have the anecdote, the everyone knows anecdote where, did you know that, Viggo Mortensen broke his toe whenever he kicked the helmet out of anger? Oh my God, so exciting. I didn't have anything like that from this sequence, so I just wanted to flag it that had we been watching the movie, I would have had a fun fact ready, but I don't for this, so...
Did you know that our friend and former guest Don Marshall made merch about that very typical anecdote moment that seems to be a very quintessential Lord of the Rings experience?
Yeah, he's got some really good merch.
Yeah.
So I totally believe it. I completely believe it. So they track the hobbits into Fangorn Forest and eventually find where the hobbits encountered Treebeard, though they have no idea what to make of Treebeard's tracks. That's when they see the creepy old man, or a creepy old man, once again. Okay, so what was your immediate reaction? Did you know who this was, or at least strongly suspect?
I really, really hoped that it was Gandalf. So there was a comment made earlier by Legolas saying that he heard the horses calling out as if to a friend. And so I had highlighted it and added a note and just wrote Shadowfax, calling it now.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I really hope. And I honestly have never heard the term the White Rider, so I nothinged the name of this chapter. It totally just blew right over my head. So I didn't think anything of it. And so when an old man appeared again, I'm like, please be Gandalf. Please be Gandalf. Please be Gandalf. And, Tolkien did a good job making you wait until the very end to be like, okay, no, legit, it is. It's Gandalf.
Yeah. But we did find out that it wasn't Gandalf the night before.
No, and that gave me goosebumps. That made all the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I did not like it. No, ma'am.
I had forgotten. When I saw him, I was like, oh, it's Gandalf. Like, hello. Like, he's going to show up. It's going to be amazing. Completely forgot. No, that wasn't Gandalf. That was Saruman. We should have been freaked out. And instead, I was like, easy breezy. Not a problem. Creepy. A little creepy.
Yeah, I thought it was super creepy. But we did find out that that's why we saw a giant eagle. So that was, kind of justifying that that's why we saw Gwahir. And sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you mentioned, like, we did find out ultimately that it was Gandalf. So I put his reveal. It was so dramatic. So they try to attack him, but he commands them not to. And as if by magic, they don't. Like, Gimli freezes, Legolas drops his bow and is like surprised by it. They ask his name. Of course, he does not answer. They see his white garments and accuse him of being Saruman. And in the most flamboyant, in my mind's eye, way possible, it leap and flourish, finally reveals himself to be Gandalf. So how'd you feel about all that?
So I do feel like there might have been like a little bit of a glamour happening or whatever, because even Aragorn, afterwards says, my eyes, how could I not see you? So I do feel like there's a little bit of mysticism around that reveal for sure. But yeah, I thought it was good. I think that I feel like the movie version did it justice,
Yeah.
It was enough. I think that what I liked about it the most is even in the writing, it's clear that he's Gandalf and yet not 100% Gandalf. He's a little rusty, or there's spots, or, he's like, oh, Gandalf, that sounds familiar. Sure.
Yeah, that's totally right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like I cut you off earlier. Were you going to say something that you didn't just say?
That he still talks in riddles, but at least this time Aragorn called him out on it.
Yeah. Bless. He's like, man, just give it to me plain. Like, yeah. And then, of course, his excuse is, oh, I was actually just talking to myself. Like, okay, Gandalf, whatever. So speaking of what Gandalf has to say, he notes that he had passed through fire and deep water since they parted, that he had forgotten much he thought he knew, and learned much that he'd forgotten, that he can see many things far off, but cannot see many things close at hand. What do you make of this?
I make of this a mystical version of coming back from the dead, where you have literally passed through to a new life and you are more tuned into the big picture than you are to your immediate past, right? So first off, I loved the story of him and the Balrog in locked in dread battle, and they wind up going underwater and he turns into like a slimy snake or whatever it winds up being, and then he still ascends back all the way up through the mines of Moria, through the endless stair, I think it's called. Like, the whole resurrection story was incredibly moving, like very gripping, and did a great job. So I kind of liked that. Actually, Peter Jackson did that when Saruman took possession. This is the movies. When Saruman took possession, held Gandalf hostage up on the heights, and he gets rescued from there. And all he does it as the briefest of flashbacks, and he's like, I was delayed. And so I kind of did that in my mind, is that he was trying to tell them, it was a fight and I don't really want to get into it. But in his mind, he was having a flashback to this ridiculous, epic cage match that he was having with this force of nature, essentially. So I thought that was very cool. And was just additional context. I totally lost my... so going back to, I think that he got really close to the source, whatever you consider the source to be. And so, again, he was kind of tuned into some master plans. And it's just kind of, his perspective has just shifted enough that now he's more focused on the big picture and a little less focused on just the role that the hobbits and the ring play.
Yeah. I love that it says he was sent back naked for a brief time until his task was done. So it's so obviously, to me, it's like so obviously whoever his creator is or whatever, the higher power with the capital P, presumably, it sent him back, like, deliberately. So I thought that was really cool. I thought it was interesting to find out that the reason the shadow passed without Frodo and the ring being revealed to Sauron, I assume while Frodo was sitting up at the high seat, like on the top of the mountain, was because Gandalf was striving against Sauron, like from a distance. You remember whenever it's like, the thing is coming at Frodo, and we, like, I guess assumed Frodo decided that he wasn't going to let Sauron see him. It's like,
no.
Like, either no, or because Gandalf said he, like, had to really strive. If Frodo had made the other decision, Gandalf wouldn't have been able to prevent it, right? It was like a combo wombo of, like, Gandalf trying to protect and Frodo making the right call. But I love to get that behind the scenes info, like the deeds.
No, I love it. So that was my second big bullet, was the resurrection story. Additional context was awesome. And the additional insight into Saruman. So things like that, when he is gripped in this epic mental power battle, but also, why isn't Saruman looking for him? And why hasn't Sauron found them yet? And all of that behind the scenes stuff. And also bringing up the fact that Saruman is likely in a place where he's looking to double cross Sauron. So setting all of that up, all of that context again. So this part of this chapter was hard for me because I'm like, was this all super obvious and I am just an idiot? It did not get that from the movie, but it genuinely never occurred to me that Saruman would be making a play for the ring for himself. Never occurred to me. And then I'm reading through this and I'm like, well, clearly that all makes perfect sense.
That makes it. I definitely don't think they emphasized it in the movies.
Okay.
They had the Uruk-hai, Saruman's creations, but it did make it seem like, if I'm remembering right, like Saruman at all times felt very much like an agent of Sauron, right? He's got the Palantir. Well, I don't want to talk too much about the deets from later, even though you've seen them. But in the movies, I think it was very much more like he's kind of acting on behalf of Sauron, not against him. Because like that Gandalf had a lot of insight.
Nuance. There's a lot of nuance there in how he went through and just systematically was like, of course his gaze was drawn to Minas Tirith and this, that, and the other thing. And I'm reading it through going, that totally tracks. But I feel like I didn't watch this movie. I don't think we watched the same movie, you guys.
Yeah. It was cool though, because like Gandalf also points out that along with Saruman kind of going towards his own gain, if he can, Sauron's ultimate strategy, right? Which is like Sauron is constantly wondering where the ring is and how it's going to be used against him, not ever whether it's going to be used against him, right? He's never considering that someone would want to destroy the ring rather than wield it, because he can't like relate to that. He can't imagine a world in which you would not want that tool. Right, which is so fascinating, and that is why he's extending his reach away from Mordor, which is exactly what the hobbits need to get in there, sneak on in there. So yeah, the fact that Gandalf has all of this like inside information, presumably partially, because he's getting like reports from Quahir the Windlord, but also because he's got this like higher level view of everything now that he's been beyond and come back.
Elevated in some way.
Very helpful for the good guys, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so he also talks about, because like all of his insights, he's got insight into where the hobbits are, right? Not like he didn't know that Sam went with Frodo, and when he found that out, he was really happy, which made me really happy.
Yes.
But he knew about Merry and Pippin, and I flagged a little literary umami for this. Their coming was like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche in the mountains. Even as we talk here, I hear the first rumblings. It's just like, I know it's not like the most flowery language, but I am a sucker for like a simile or like a metaphor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the falling of small stones that starts an avalanche. It's just like, that's exactly what happened. They show up.
And I think, and it's so it's so like vintage Hobbit, right? It's very small actions of good people that change the world. And so it's just another way to represent that. I think that it's beautiful.
Yeah, it was really lovely. And a perfect way to phrase it. So, okay, so this also got my attention. Gandalf says that Treebeard is the oldest living thing that walks beneath the sun on Middle-earth. Did you immediately think what I thought when I read this?
I thought, are you sure it's not Tom?
Yeah, that's exactly. I was like, I'm sorry. Tom's name by some people is eldest. How does that not make him the oldest?
Maybe Tom doesn't count because he died and came back.
Yeah. Yeah, my thought was Tom doesn't count because he's like an otherworldly, godlike being, not a living thing. That's what I thought.
Oh my god, is Tom Hoyd?
No Cosmere spoilers, but
no
maybe.
Cosmere spoilers, but like we want to talk about, I never even considered that we could do crazy loony theories on Tom as a world hopper, and where could we take that?
Yeah, maybe he is. Fun fact, Lord of the Rings is part of the Cosmere. Who knew?
Oh my god.
That was my explanation. Was I guess Tom isn't a living thing. He's something else.
I mean, that's a thin thread, but I'll give it to you because he did pass and then return.
Yeah. Did he?
I feel like yes. Now I have to go back and check.
Well, now I'm like, wasn't that our headcanon for?
Because I was like, are they Beren and Luthien?
Yeah, that's so like. If he's not Beren and Luthien, there wasn't another instance where he passed, right?
No.
Okay, right. So.
No.
Right. So
that was all. I was like, if we're saying that Tom, I'm saying if Tom is, somebody who passed and came back, does that make them Beren and Luthien reincarnated?
I see. Okay. Well, that would be another explanation if we subscribe to that headcanon. Okay, so Aragorn reappoints Gandalf as their leader. To the extent he had the authority to do that. Noting the Dark Lord has 9, but we have 1, mightier than they. The White Rider, he has passed through the fire and the abyss, and they shall fear him. We will go where he leads. So, I don't know about you. There's something about a man who has every right to assume that he's in charge, who is ready and willing to follow and support someone more qualified, like regardless of pedigree. Like, do you agree?
Yeah. 1,000%.
Like, Aragorn.
And also Aragorn just delivering in spades on some great language chapter after chapter.
Yeah. He's really, he's evolved, like from when we first met him as Strider, right? He's just like, he just keeps getting, I don't know, more attractive and like more noble. And and it's good for him.
I did like that Gandalf counseled Aragorn and basically told him, "Don't keep beating yourself up over these decisions. There, you did the best you had with the information you had available to you at the time." So I did like that Gandalf, tried to give him that relief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a good guy. Gandalf's a good dude.
Yeah.
Who knew? So we talked about the fight, right? Legolas wanted Gandalf to recount what all happened to him, and it was a doozy.
Mm-hmm.
And he, I have to read this. He threw down his enemy, and he fell from the high place and broke the mountainside where he smote it in his ruin. And then we talked about how darkness took him. He got sent back, whatever. As he's laying there, just like letting time and space pass him by, Gwaihir the Windlord shows up and takes him to Lothlorien because Galadriel was actually the one who sent Gwaihir for him, which harkens back to the Fellowship where they're like, he's dead. Okay, like, sorry to hear that he's dead. You know what? Like, she totally didn't believe it at any moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, all of that, the Lothlorien thing. How did you feel about that?
I did remember our moment in the Fellowship where she refused to use the word dead.
Yeah.
But also, like, how does she know?
Maybe
so
she's
that's
a
just
power with a capital P.
She is a power, as far as I'm concerned.
Same.
She's a power.
Yeah.
So I thought that was, and I did like the fact that Gwaihir got a little cheeky. He was like, take me to Lothlorien at once, and Gwaihir's like, on it, bro. I already got my orders. Thank you.
Yeah. To the extent I follow orders, like
yes.
I follow the orders I want to follow, and the orders I got from Galadriel. Thank you.
Yeah. So I thought that was a funny little, again, just little cheeky moments. They're fun, little bits of sass. And then that they each had a message from Galadriel, although they were not necessarily fun messages.
Yeah, I've got them kind of like summarized. To Aragorn, about the return of the Dunedain, noting that the dead watch the road that leads to the sea. To Legolas, to avoid the sea. And to Gimli, naming him Lockbearer, she said her thoughts with him, but that he should have a care to lay his axe to the right tree. So now try to put yourself in the shoes of someone who has not seen the movies. I know it's hard because you have. To the extent you can, what would you have made of all of this had you not seen the movies?
I would avoid coastline.
Yeah. Yeah, it all sounds kind of bleak.
Yeah, like, I think we should avoid anything that starts or sounds like sea.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And with Gimli, I'm like, okay, so is what she is like, it's like the wrong tree. Is he already know that though? Because they're in Fangorn? I
don't know.
Like, was that like
I'm like,
blatant?
how do you know which tree is the right tree?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a little cryptic, but that's par for the course, I guess, with the Galadriel and all the powers that we know of. They can be pretty cryptic. Okay, so the group of four resolve to head to Rohan, and Gandalf summons Shadowfax. So you're the horse girl in this equation. Did his description do anything for you?
Absolutely. Did you ever do a stint with the romance covers that had, like long flowing Fabio hair and
my mother
usually they weren't shirts. I feel like that was the Fabio version of an intro for Shadowfax. Like, it was majestic as can be. And I thought that it was lovely. I already love the King of Horses, obviously.
How can you not?
So, yeah. And he brought, their mounts back with them, which, of course, was very validating for me that I was 100% correct. So...
True. Yep. Shadowfax calling it now. You did it. You called it. So as the group travels, they notice smoke in the direction of Isengard, I assume. I had to reread the passages to make sure. There was smoke, I think, in the direction of Isengard. Yeah.
I think so, too.
So
at least that's how I took it.
That's how I took it. So Legolas asks what it is, and Gandalf responds, battle and war. And that is the end of the chapter. final
And I just wrote that I thought that was an epic ending. I thought that was a great, sometimes there are really strong sign-offs. I think this was right up there with, Here Lies Balin. Like it was just a really strong end. I know.
I just got goosebumps.
R.I.P. Balin. You were the bestest. I just thought that it was a really great chapter end.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we've got a tradition where we pick an MVP from the chapters we've read for each episode. Cue the music. Jessica, who would you name as your MVP this episode?
I have to go with Treebeard. He is just 110% awesome. He is legend. He is so old and so wise, and he empowers all of his remaining people to, puts out this call to arms to them to fight the evil that lives next door. I couldn't give it to anybody but Treebeard this time.
Yeah. So I will say that I considered Gandalf for this because the story was so epic, but I rationalized by he was actually just telling us about things that have happened in the past, and he already won MVP for me for his fight with the Balrog back in the Fellowship. I didn't get the full deets, but I gave him his props. So I completely agree. Like whenever I thought about these two chapters, Gandalf was like he's an honorable mention, but Treebeard is hands down the winner. Like he saw what was happening. He called the Entmoot. He educated Merry and Pippin on the situation, and he orchestrated the Ents march to war. And as we mentioned, like he, as far as we know, is the first being to declare open war in this conflict,
which just makes it all the more the correct choice,
Yeah, exactly. Like if this deliberate thinker is going to do it, then it's obviously the right move. And it was just epic, like the decision that was made, and you felt like the swelling of the power within the forest coming down towards Isengard. So it's Treebeard for me as well. Look at us, we're doing, like last week we had the same one. We're twinning. If you are listening and you want to weigh in on who your MVP is from this episode, I think there are a couple that are fully justifiable in this instance. Then let us know in the comments on YouTube, or if you're on our Discord or on our social media. We're really curious to see if you agree with us, because even though we're twinning, it doesn't mean that we're right. Just
right.
I'd like to think it does, but it doesn't technically. Okay. So that's it, I guess. Next week, for next episode, we will be reading chapters 6 and 7. It's a little bit of a shorter read, which, after the Treebeard chapter, I think we've earned. It's okay. So thank you so much for tuning into episode 2 of season 3 of But Are There Dragons, brought to you by your hosts, Jessica Sadai and me, Kritter XD. Don't forget to follow us at But Are There Dragons on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and But Dragons Pod, just one T, on X. You can also find your hosts on social media as Kritter XD and Shelf Indulgence. That's it for today. We're workshopping new catchphrases for season 3, so let us know on social media how you feel about this one. Few can foresee whither their road will lead them, till they come to its end. And this is our end. Until next week. Bye!
Bye!